Welcome back to the channel, folks. This is Thomas, and before I start my next big project, sometimes I look at all of the scrap pieces of foam that I have, and I really feel bad about going out and buying more foam when I have all this surplus just waiting. One of my pet peeves about collecting is when you just have figures on a shelf and you can't see any of them because they're not elevated. So I thought this would be a great time to take some of that scrap foam and make some diorama terrain bases so I can elevate my figures. So I stacked up these pieces of foam to see how tall I can go, and we're going to start building. Now this display will be for my Gijoe Classified, Action Force from Valaverse, and my Jada Toys Street Fighter. So I'm going to use Serpentor Sky Chariot as the focal point, and we're going to build around it. So right now I'm just taking this long scrap piece of foam, just going to find the center, and then we're going to start marking off some of the edges of where my panels will go. So I'm going to put 3 identical panels on top, and then we'll start cutting away at them to start putting in some of the detail. Once I get the next layer cut of those 3 panels, I'm going to use the Sky Chariot just as an outline so I know where to cut around. I want him to be a little lower since he stands taller than the other figures. So I'm going to cut out some ledges onto these and then carve them up into rocks so that you can still see all of the figures behind him. So while Serpentor will be in the middle, I'm still going to make some drop down areas on the side panels. So I'll go ahead and make some rough lines on the edges, and then this will just be another layer to the steps and the rock formations. I'm using my Proxxon hot wire cutter just to cut out these pieces, but pretty much everything after this point will be done with the blade. Now you can even do this with a knife. If you had an old butcher knife, it's really easy to cut through the foam, but for now I'm just going to use this hot wire table, make easy work of this before we really get into carving. So just double checking to make sure that Serpentor fits, and then we're good to go. Now I'm just taking any piece of scrap foam that I have lying around. This green foam is from a very old project. I haven't purchased this in a while, but you can see where I use the hand wire tool that makes that very distinct pattern. So even though that design is on there, we're going to cut through that with our knife and then keep stacking these pieces of foam so I get an idea of how we're going to lay out this terrain. Now I'm just taking my knife and cutting away at the foam, and I'm trying to go in the same direction for most of these cuts, and then I'm using my fingers to go ahead and peel off all of those loose pieces. You can even use some needle nose pliers if you wanted to, but either way you're going to get the same look. So this is very tedious work and takes a long time. This is probably going to take the most time of this project, but just to save some time, I like to take the knife and peel off some of the pieces so I'm not always doing it with my fingers. And this does get really messy, so I just try to keep my workstation clean and vacuum up all the bits as we go along. And when the majority of my cutting is done, I'm just going to lay out all of the pieces of foam so that I know exactly how I'm going to lay this out before I start gluing anything. And I'm already starting to love the way that this looks because there's lots of different levels, so you'll be able to see every single figure once this is done. So the base of this diorama is complete. There's some cutting left to do. I definitely want to add some more details onto the actual surfaces of the diorama, but for the most part we have our shape. So we're going to go ahead and start making those extra cuts, and then we'll move on to paint. And now I'm going to start making some cracks into the surface of the foam. So I'm just going to score a line with my blade, and on either side I'm going to go in from a diagonal angle and then kind of pry out those pieces of foam. So I'm going to do this, repeat it for each level, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm cutting the cracks into the edges as well so that that line is continuing onto the side. Then I'm just giving a layer of Mod Podge. You can use PVA glue just to adhere this to the base of the diorama. And I'm trying to give it full coverage so it sticks very well. I don't want to use hot glue because it dries super fast, and I don't want there to be any gaps from the base and each level that I put on. So I almost forgot to actually do the edges and the base of the diorama, so I want to make sure that I go ahead and do that as well. And then we're going to use our ball of aluminum foil and roll it up against all the surfaces of the foam to give it some nice texture. So I'll do the tops, I'll do the edges, just so that when we go ahead and do some dry brushing, a lot of that detail will stick. Then we'll continue gluing all of the pieces and then add on some more detail. Once everything's glued, I'm going to take some ball spackle and then just cover all the edges or the gaps, but then I'm also going to rub this onto the surface of the piece. So I really want to see if this will actually create some nice texture, and then you'll still get all of those little details that we did with the aluminum foil ball and the cracks, but I think this will add a nice layer and actually make the top surface feel like it's actual rock. And I prefer to use the pink spackle because when it dries white. So while this is still curing, I'm taking some sand from a previous project and I'm making sure that I just kind of sprinkle this and rub it into the spackle as it dries. This will make sure that it sticks and then also give us that nice added texture that we couldn't get with the aluminum foil ball. And while the sand is drying into the spackle, I'm going to put a layer of Mod Podge on the edges, and I'm going to do this so I can put a layer of some larger rocks down. So I have these pebbles that are meant for fish tanks, and I'm going to sprinkle them wherever I applied the Mod Podge, dump off the excess, and then we'll have at least some variation in rocks to make it a little more natural. And I let this sit overnight. All of the sand seems to be sticking pretty well, and we're going to let those pebbles dry. Once that's all dry, then I can go ahead and then we can give this a base coat of Mod Podge and black, and then that's going to really make all the sand and the pebbles stick before we start painting. Giving the base of the diorama a full coat of black is going to help when we start dry brushing, so I will not be giving a full coverage of any of these colors for the rest of the project. We are primarily going to be dry brushing, so I'm going to start with a darker gray, and then we'll play around with some colors to lighten it up, add some browns for grime. This way it has a real world looking natural feel. So the best part about dry brushing is if you lighten it up or you're not happy with the colors, you can always go back and take some of those colors you used previously and fix it, make some corrections, or you can tone it down with some black washes. So for this, I think I'm only going to use a black wash, but even if you wanted to add some extra grime, you can use some brown washes, some green washes. You can mix some of those colors together to get some really distinct patterns onto the base. So making my black wash using water and black acrylic paint, I'm just making sure that I give this a full coverage, and you can vary the way you want this to look depending on how long you let the wash sit. So what I'm going to do is give the whole diorama a full coat of this black wash and then slowly start wiping it away with some paper towel. And I'm going to let this sit overnight, and then once this is dry, we can finally start getting some figures on. And there you have it, folks, a quick and easy way to take some scraps and turn it into a base diorama. So this is really great terrain to make. I'm using it for 6-inch scale action figures, but tabletop gamers, I've seen a lot of them do something like this, but just a great way to get those figures off of that flat surface and onto an elevated platform. So I have Valaverse, Action Force, Gijoe Classified, and my Jaded Toy Street Fighter. That's how I like to display them. And I'm just really happy now that I can see everything and they're not being blocked by other figures. So folks, hope you enjoyed this episode. If you could hit like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. But I can really turn this into multiple displays. It doesn't have to be used for the figures I'm using it for. I can even cut it into 3 different pieces and then use them in my DTOF cabinets to elevate some of the figures I have in there. So folks, if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments. I love to talk shop, so I just love helping others kind of build out their displays. So again, yeah, if you have a question, just let me know down in the comments and I'll try to respond as quick as I could. And that's all for this one, folks. So again, stick around. We have some more projects coming up, hopefully some reviews and some live streams. But until the next episode, folks, we'll catch you next time.